So, yes?
Can you turn down the volume? It's a little distorting a little bit.
I can put it farther from me.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
How's that?
That's great.
You all can lecture me later about how sports creates vicariousness and competition and so forth, but if anyone was panicking like I was, Virginia did just win and is into the third round of the tournament, so it's okay. More serious note, that last panel, for anyone who had an ounce of compassion in them, was obviously reason enough to put every last drop of your life into trying to end war on this planet. And yet, the suffering of the aggressor nation in these wars is a little fraction of the suffering and the death and the trauma we're talking about, which is almost, statistically, almost all the people who live where the wars get fought, and almost all civilians, by everybody's definition. So they're talking about something vast in its evilness that we need to abolish in its entirety. I'm going to pass around a sheet that I'd love if you all could sign if you happen to agree with the short statement at the top of it, which people have now signed from over 100 countries, thousands of organizations and individuals, saying that we want to work to eliminate all war. And if you could sign it in such a way that I can read exactly what your name is and exactly what your email address is, or leave off your email address if you don't want to ever receive an email, because otherwise somebody else is going to get your emails, you're going to get called some other name. It's like 50% rate here on reading people's writing, so give it a try. World Beyond War is a new organization, and we have committees of all volunteers, and we welcome all new volunteers. And the first email you get, and you'll only get very occasional, will be asking you what, if anything, you'd like to help with. Our strategy committee produced this document that's now an ebook and an audiobook and a PDF and a paperback and so forth, every possible variety, that I'm going to talk about in my remarks, and I'm going to go third, but I think we're all going to touch on this theme, and that is what to replace war with. What alternative is there for handling conflict? Because conflict's not going to go away. So we're going to have three speakers, Matt Hoh and Bob Fantina and myself. And Mathew Hoh, if anybody does not know, I'll give you part of his bio. He is a senior fellow at the Center for International Policy, former director of the Afghanistan Study Group, former State Department official who resigned in protest, to his great credit, from his post in Afghanistan over U.S. strategic policy and goals in Afghanistan. This was September '09. And wrote a letter explaining exactly why, which was, I think, the best part of it. And prior to that, he was in Iraq with the State Department Reconstruction and Governance Team and as a Marine Corps company commander. And when he was back here, he was at the Pentagon and the State Department working on Afghanistan and Iraq policy. In 2010, he was named Ridenour Prize recipient for truth-telling. He is a member of the board of directors for Council for a Livable World and an advisory board member of a new organization called Expose Facts. Please welcome Mathew Hoh.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank again the organizers for including me in this. It's an honor to be a part of these panels, to be a part of this group. I'm going to repeat some of the things that if anyone was in Asheville when I spoke at the VFP. Anyone any ships, by the way? When I spoke at the VFP annual convention, I'm going to repeat a little bit of what I said then. So if you're there, I apologize because I will reference something again. But I think it's important for the conversation. The first thing I want to reference is when I spoke at the VFP annual convention, the title was "Thank you for taking the red pill," and I want to extend that to you all here as well. And this is in reference to the film The Matrix. As people see in The Matrix, Keanu Reeves. The idea behind The Matrix we're having is that mankind is being enslaved by aliens. We're all in pods. They're harvesting us for our energy or our brain waves or the electricity in our body or something or other. And we're dreaming, and this is all a dream. This is all computer simulation, and the reality is that we're in these pods. Keanu Reeves wakes up, he joins the revolutionaries who are fighting the aliens, and at one point they say to him, look, reality sucks. So you can either take this blue pill and go back to the dream world, or you can take the red pill, which is going to be very difficult, but you'll be living in reality. So I want to thank everyone here, particularly as we are in Washington, D.C., which is the capital of dissonance and disregard for the reality of most people in this world. I want to thank everyone here for taking the red pill. Because it's not easy to go against the grain of our society, go against the grain of our media, go against the grain of our academics, and go against the grain of our politics. And those are the three things I want to talk about this evening. Touch on each briefly, give a few stories, and share some of my own personal experiences, and get you thinking about what do we do, how do we change the mindset. A couple weeks ago, Bob, David, and I had a conversation, and we kind of decided what we're going to talk about, and I said talk about the mindset of war. Why are we so eager to get into it? Why is it so glorified? Why do our young people feel that it is the best thing possible, it's the only thing possible, that there are no other alternatives? If you go on television right now, you will be questioning, what's the alternative? There are no alternatives. When we put out a report on Afghanistan several years ago, we were told over and over again by people in the media that it's not serious, that it's not grounded in reality, it can't happen. What were we talking about? We were talking about political reconciliation. And certainly war in Afghanistan has not worked, and political reconciliation hasn't happened. But the first thing I want to talk about is the politics of this. And I want to share a few stories about why we need to look at the politics and understand that we need an alternative to the political system we have now. That we need an alternative to the Democratic and Republican parties. That we need an alternative to a political system that is captured completely by money. When over the last few years, I worked in Congress, working to try and end the wars, met with a number of members of Congress. I remember, and I want to share a few of these with you, just to give you an idea of what actually occurs. And these are all prominent, and they're all members of the Democratic Party. These are the people who are supposedly aligned with much of how you and I think. And the first one was, and there's multiple, I'm just going to give you three examples. The first one was Adam Smith. Adam Smith, at that time, was the ranking member on the House Armed Services Committee, so a senior Democrat for the House of Representatives for Armed Services. And he said to myself and several others, including Derek Crow, if any of you know Derek Crow, said, I know they lie to us all the time, but there's really not much I can do about it. And what he was talking about was the military, and about how the military comes into his committee, the Armed Services Committee, and lies to them all the time, and how there's nothing he can do about it. The second one was Ike Skelton. Mr. Skelton, of course, was either the ranking member or the committee chair for the House Armed Services Committee for a number of years. And when I met with Mr. Skelton on March 18th of 2010, I remember it was the day after St. Patrick's Day, and I was incredibly hungover. Mr. Skelton said, and to remind you again, he's either been the number one or number two person for the House Armed Services Committee for the entire breadth of these wars. This is 2010, so this is 9 years, 8.5 years after we invaded Afghanistan. He says to me, he says, Matt, you're the first person who has come in here and given me a negative briefing on Afghanistan.
Yay.
The third one I want to touch briefly on is Jack Reed of Rhode Island, former paratrooper, ranking number 2 on the Senate Armed Services Committee until recently. And Senator Reed met with us, heard us out on Afghanistan, and walking us out, his senior aide, his chief of staff, says to us, she says, you know, we hear what you're saying, and we know that there is this difference in between what's actually happened in Afghanistan and what the military is telling us, but we don't think it's our place to get involved. And then the final one, of course, was I had a very great opportunity in 2009 to address the entire Democratic Caucus. So we were in the basement of the Capitol building, about 200 members of Congress all sitting there in folding chairs eating sandwiches they made. Very surreal. And I speak about Afghanistan. This is November of 2009. Speak about Afghanistan. And they get riled up. They get excited. John Murtha is really leading this effort. We're not going to let this happen. We're not going to let this nation go down the path. We're different than Republicans. We're not just going to back our president because A, B, C, and D. And then, up out of the middle of them, pops Speaker Pelosi. And the first thing I thought was, wow, she does look like my mom. My mom looks exactly like her. But what she then said was, hold on. This is the week after they passed the Affordable Care Act, after they passed Obamacare. We just scored a major political victory. And this is our president's war, and we cannot put him into a corner. We have to support him. And all these people, and I swear, at this point, the members of Congress were stacked up, a dozen deep at 2 microphones, wanting to talk about how they weren't going to let Afghanistan become Iraq. And she just cut it all out. Now, of course, the Republican side is not better. And if you had any hopes for Rand Paul, if you saw the news today, Rand Paul, the great fiscal conservative, he's going to order the Pentagon, put an end to it. He just put a bill in motion today to allow the Pentagon to transfer money wherever they want. So what we have here is we have a political system that is not responsive to the truth, to reality, or to principle. And of course, and I promised Cindy I would talk about Hillary Rodham Clinton. I never worked with Secretary Clinton. But I've worked with Ambassador Dick Holbrooke and Ambassador Carl Eikenberry in 2009 in the run-up to the escalation of the Afghan war. And they were both very clear with me. And these are things I had to start talking about recently because for some reason, for a number of years, I had this notion that I had to keep confidences. That while our young men and women were dying and suffering and killing and causing others to suffer, I should somehow keep confidence with these people in power. So I'm now finally breaking my confidence in these things. But both Holbrooke and Eikenberry were very clear to me that even though they agreed and that their assessment that escalation of the war in Afghanistan was going to fail, Hillary Clinton shut them down every time because politically it was better for her to be seen as escalating the war than not. Better for her to be a hawk than to do what was right. So I'll follow us up with, to tag on to what was just talked about with the suffering of our service members and their families. And I agree with David, I've seen it firsthand. As much as we suffer here, it's nothing compared to what those that are suffering overseas. But the notion, though, that what we did with the think tank I work for, we put together a study. And we're a 501c3, we're normal, I mean, we're a real organization. And we approached the Senate, approached all 100 members in the Senate, and we asked for them to provide feedback on what they do in relationship to the families of soldiers who were killed and wounded overseas. We just want to know, do you send letters? Do you visit with the families? What type of contact do you have? Do you know how many responses we got? 1. From Bernie Sanders. That was it. No responses from any other office. What that tells me is that there were probably some who were afraid that some, of course, just didn't want to respond. Some felt, oh, we'll get in trouble if we say what we do. But I guarantee you most of them, the reason why they didn't respond is because 14 years into these wars, they have no policy on how to interact with the families of the dead or the wounded or the suffering. So that is just a way to say we need to find alternatives to the political system at hand. That if we want to change the mindset that gets us into war, we have to find the right people to put in Washington, D.C. And we have to abandon any support for the Democratic Party and any support for the Republican Party. We have to look at supporting Greens, Libertarians, look at supporting independents, and look at getting money out of politics. The next And I could go on all night, but the next section is you know, I want to touch briefly on here is media. And if you watch, of course, these wars on television, and if, of course, you know, I mean, if you haven't seen Norman Solomon's War Made Easy, you know, go home and Netflix it or get it on iTunes or whatever. Excellent documentary on the marketing of the Iraq War. But what you see with the media, though, is that there only seems to be one view. Our view doesn't really get represented in the media so much. And all kinds of studies have come out recently. There was a study that said 80% of those who are speaking on the Islamic State are somehow directly or indirectly in compensation to the defense industry. And I don't doubt that. But I don't blame the media. I blame us. Because we're not putting ourselves forward well enough. We're not pitching ourselves. We're not providing people who have the credentials, the backing, the ability to speak well and do well on television. And I've been working with media now for 5 years. They are an organization, an industry, just like anyone else. Those bookers and producers who do Bill O'Reilly or Aaron Burnett or The Today Show or whoever, they've got so much on their plate, they just want to get through the day. Most of them are competent in their jobs. But during that hour, they may have to find someone who can talk about the wars, someone who can talk about Kim Kardashian, and someone who can talk about Virginia winning tonight. If we are not meeting them, if we are not pitching, if we are not forming our own media placement organizations, if we are not working in the way the media works, we have no one else to blame for the media being controlled by the defense industry than us. The reason why these defense industry is able to put people on television all the time is because their people are good, because their people are prepared, because they're able to pitch their people, because they're always ready. Because the defense industry can get these retired generals, pay them a ton of money, have them sitting basically in town cars in Manhattan all day long, waiting to go on television. That's the way the media works. They work whatever's easiest for them. And so while we must be vigilant, we must protest against the defense industry going on television and not being exposed as a defense industry. I mean, you'll see these guys go on with the retired general so-and-so. Doesn't say he's making $500,000 a year from Boeing. Okay? We need to expose that, we need to hammer on that, but we also must do our part, and we also must get on it ourselves. Twitter is great, Facebook is great, literacy op-ed is great, but what still dictates the public opinion in this country is the television. And we have to do a better job of getting onto it and spreading our message. As I said this morning, we hold both the virtue of being right morally on these issues and being right as proven by history. Everyone in this room here is correct on these wars. Everyone in this room here is correct on the Iraq War, was correct on Afghanistan, was correct on Vietnam. I mean, I went to them, so I guess I'm only correct recently. But now I'm okay. But we've got to think that way, all right? We can't take them on head-on, of course, right? The Pentagon has billions and billions of dollars every year to spend on PR. This $1 trillion a year we spend on national security, of course, that goes right back into the whole system. But we must find a way to be in the media, to be a part of it, okay? Understanding how it works, understanding what they're looking for. The second part of this, the next part of this, about the mindset, is we need to change the academic side. We need to change our institutions. We need to change how we teach our young people, how they're addressed, what they're taught. If you look at, who's seen the film Inside Job? Matt Damon narrates. Excellent film on the financial crash, 2008. In that film, if you remember, Damon talks about how all the people come out of certain different, all people in finance come from a few schools. In foreign policy, it's even less. They come from Columbia and Harvard. Some come from Yale, a lot come from Georgetown. Some from Stanford. And who teaches at these schools? Madeline, exactly. Madeline Albright, David Petraeus, John Yoo.
John D. Rice.
Right, exactly, on and on and on. At my alma mater, the guy who was Rumsfeld's chief assistant is now dean of our international relations school.
Who is it?
Admiral Giamatti. So, how do we change that? And you see that what these schools allow. But it's because they're being put forward. They're being put forward. Okay? If I bring this around, I won't pass it around anymore because I'm afraid of losing it. But I picked this up when I was lecturing at the Kennedy School, the Harvard Kennedy School, a few years ago. And this is a CIA recruitment pamphlet. And I use this because it illustrates the mindset we're up against, but that is so, it's not contradicted. And in it, again, this is recruitment. It says, Americans watch about an hour of news daily, join the CIA, live it 24/7. Okay, National Clandestine Service. There are 4 photos on here. Okay? The first photo, in this corner here, is a guy celebrating the fall of the Berlin Wall, 1989. Okay, I picked this up in 2011. All right? The second picture, is the pulling down of the statue of Saddam Hussein in Firdos Square in Baghdad in 2003. The greatest intelligence failure of all time, the CIA is putting on their recruitment brochure. The bottom, going down here, photo of Russian ICBMs on parade in Red Square, probably circa 1987, even earlier than the Berlin Wall coming down. The kids who were reading these and being recruited were born around 1987. This photo here, just a group of brown guys, up to no good probably. But no, seriously, it's just a collection of brown-skinned men. Probably maybe Indian continent, I don't know where they're from. I mean, for all I know, they could be standing in line for Lady Gaga tickets. But according to the CIA, these brown-skinned men are just as dangerous as Soviet nuclear missiles. So you put all this together and you say, who are they trying to recruit? And why does Harvard allow this stuff to be put up on its walls? But then you say, well, where are we? Are we on campuses recruiting? Are we countering this message? Are we out there doing what we need to do? We are, but I know we are, but how? A little bit.
We have to fight to get on those.
Exactly.
Campuses.
And you know, this is, trust me, I mean, I know who I'm talking to here, and I know, again, I'm preaching to the choir, and I know what I'm saying is probably upsetting people because you don't like to be scolded. And I know I have no right to say that to a lot of people in here who spent time in jail, but the fact is, guys, we're going to war again.
Do you pay taxes?
I'm going to start being a tax register this year.
Thank you.
And that's where you get to, is what are alternatives? Just as, what can we be doing better? And so please don't take this. I'm sitting here looking at Medea,
I like being scolded.
you know, and like, so I feel very chagrined at saying this. But it's also, I think, important for us to so when we come back, we have these meetings again, as we work together, okay, what can we build on? What can we do better? Where are the vulnerabilities of the system we're up against? So, as we think about alternatives, how do we fight this beast? Again, we can't take on them head on. We don't have those resources. So how do we fight them in a guerrilla war, asymmetrical style? But in order to do that, we must understand how that system works, what we're up against. Okay, so I just want to leave you with that message of, you know, hey, I love you all. And I am late to this game, and I know that. So I have no right to stand here and say you guys aren't doing your jobs, because you are. Don't get me wrong. Just saying that let's think about how we can subvert the system, take advantage of it, and meet it where it is weakest. Again, I saw people, you know, disagreeing with my assessment of the media. But I'm telling you, I get called for MSNBC and CNN all the time. They'll have us on. We just have to make sure we meet their standards. And that means being media trained, media qualified, okay? Meeting what they want because they're a business. Okay, so as we move forward, let's think about how are we gonna get our message out? How are we gonna educate our young people? How are we gonna recruit them? Okay, and how are we gonna get people here in Washington DC who aren't gonna roll over just because somebody's got stars on their shoulders? Okay, so I wanna thank you all. I really appreciate your time, really appreciate being here, and yeah, turn it over to David again.